Greetings traveler, I'm SnapJelly, and what's the difference between a Zweihander, a Greatsword and a Longsword? Well, that is actually quite easy to explain. First, the Longsword and everything else, there's quite a bit of a difference because a Longsword is a medieval two-handed sword that's about this size. This one comes up to my boob. Generally people say that maximum they should come up to your armpit, standing tip on the ground. And they are, in modern HEMA, these are the most popular. This is generally what people like using the most. Whereas a Greatsword is a great bit bigger, actually. They can come up to, they can be man-high or even taller. They are incredibly big swords. They're huge, huge swords. Now, Zweihander, basically it's also a Greatsword but in a different language. Zweihander is the German word for greatsword. Literally it means two-hander, and as far as I understand, that is because in longsword fencing, because longsword is the two-handed medieval sword, right? There's still an awful lot of one-handed movement going on. There's an awful lot of techniques that you let go of the blade for with one hand, and you just use one hand technically. And a greatsword is not too heavy for you to swing it with one hand, but it's just unwieldy. But same with the longsword. Like if you just hold it one hand and never use your second, it's just gonna be awkward. So as far as I understand, it's just because a greatsword or Zweihander is a really dedicated two-handed weapon, because swinging it with doing anything with one hand with that thing is just ridiculous. So you always need two hands, and that's why the Germans called it a Zweihander. But basically, if a German would encounter a Brit with a greatsword, he would call it a Zweihander, and if a Brit would encounter a German with a Zweihander, he would call that a greatsword. So it's the same, it's a different word for the same thing, and it's just different language. But I understand the confusion behind this, because for some reason, with greatsword specifically, people like calling that Zweihanders. You see that an awful lot, that when people are just talking about greatswords, that they say Zweihander. And honestly, I don't know where that comes from, but there's a bit of confusion about that. It causes people to think that greatswords and Zweihanders are different things. Well, actually, a Zweihander is just a German greatsword. That's another thing that people sometimes do, usually also with greatswords specifically, is that they call it, people like calling stuff the name that it was given in the language that it originated in. So people call a German greatsword a Zweihander, a Italian greatsword a Spadone, and a Spanish greatsword a Montante. Like, some people do that, and that is not per se a problem if the person you're talking to knows all of these words and knows what they mean. In that case, it's not a problem. But if not, it's just confusing, right? I have personally never really had a problem with this, at least not actively what I can remember. It's of course difficult if you just start learning stuff, because you know you get all these terms thrown at you that you don't know the meaning of. But really, I find it, I gotta say, even though I don't really have a problem with this, I do honestly think it's a bit dumb, because, you know, like, people like doing this specifically with greatswords, and all other swords it's not an issue. Like, if people find a sword in Italy, any other kind of fucking sword, people aren't all of a sudden gonna call it a spada. You know, people are just gonna say sword, whatever. But if it's a great sword that they find, it's a spadone all of a sudden. And personally, I find that it's less confusing for people in general to call it a Italian greatsword or a German greatsword or whatever. This is just me. People will probably disagree with that, but the thing is, like, I've chosen English as my language to shout everything to the world, like, because I'm not a native English speaker, you know. But yeah, the language can be very confusing with these kind of things. It's not limited to swords. When you're talking about swords, greatswords is a very good example of that. It happens a lot, specifically with the word Zweihander. But like another very famous example is the word sallet, which is a specific kind of helmet. The word sallet comes from the French salé, and you write it the same way, but you pronounce it differently because the T is silent, right? But in English it's not. So, usually, personally, I tend to say sallet. And when I do, There's always somebody going like, it's pronounced Salé because it comes from French, and in French the T is silent. Well, the thing is, yes, the word originally comes from French, and in French the T is silent, but the word has been adopted by English, and in English the T is not silent. But then, contrary to that, thinking about another word that originated in France was trebuchet, and it has the same principle. It ends with ET, and in French that's silent, but in English it's also silent, right? Nobody says trebuchet. It's trebuchet, both in English and French. But in the word salé, people tend to pronounce that as salad. And why is that? Well, nobody knows. That's just how language develops. Language changes over time and changes a lot. In fact, the way that we talk now is very different from the way that people talked in medieval England. You wouldn't be able to understand them at all. So, language changes a lot, and things just sometimes change in awkward ways. And in HEMA and historical things, that happened a lot, because the word trebuchet comes from French, but the trebuchet itself doesn't even come from France. So there's a the trebuchet comes from China, and in Chinese it's pronounced completely differently again. So, and I'm not even gonna try and pronounce that. So you know, it changes a lot and makes things difficult. A lot of swords as well. Aside from greatswords, when you're speaking English and you say a specific kind of sword, like a specific name, to refer to a specific kind of sword. Whilst in the language that sword originated from, it just means sword. Like katana is the easiest example. When you say katana, you know, everybody pictures the same thing. But like katana in Japanese can be used to describe just a sword in general. Like a while ago I had a discussion slightly with somebody when I said xifas. Was it now? The xifas in English is used to refer to a specific kind of ancient Greek short sword. But in Greek, xephos just means sword. So it depends on what language you're speaking, really. Like, when I'm speaking English and I say xephos, I mean that specific sword. When I'm speaking Greek, which I can't, but if I would speak Greek, somebody speaks Greek and they say xephos, it just means sword. You know, so there's a bit of confusion there. And, it's very hard. There's really no solution to it. You just kind of have to learn the stuff over time. Like, ask your favorite YouTuber. Because YouTubers never get anything wrong. Another large confusing factor is like descriptive names. Like think about broadsword, longsword, small sword, right? A lot of these are just misnomers, really. Like a broadsword isn't particularly broad. A longsword is pretty long, but greatswords are longer, and lots of rapiers are longer, or the same length as longsword, so none of that. A small sword isn't particularly small, it's just thin for the most part, so yeah, names like these can make things difficult as well. Now, personally, I just like using English. That's why I chose English instead of Dutch to make videos. But, you know, even in my native language, I encountered this problem because, like, to all Dutch people out there, all Dutch people watching, do any of you know what the Dutch word for falchion is? It's foutsoen, with AU. Did you know that? Probably didn't. No one did. Let's be honest, you didn't know that. No one knows that. I didn't. The only reason that I know that is because at like an online fucking reenactment HEMA, nerd market, whatever, I saw some old Dutch guy getting angry at a teenager for not knowing the Dutch word. He was like, those young people always using the English terms. Why we gotta speak English? We're in the Netherlands, we should speak Dutch. I'm not even joking. That's really why I know this. Like, everybody calls falchions here, regardless of if the rest of the sentence is Dutch. People just say falchion. People don't know the Dutch word for falchion. But on the other hand, when you say messer, both in English and German, or in English and Dutch, I mean, if you say messer, people always know that you refer to something like that, whereas in German, messer just means knife, right? Technically, officially, you would have to specify and call it a langmesser, or a grosse messer, or a Greatsmesser, but people don't care. I'm speaking English, and when I say messer, people know I mean that, so why would I ever have to specify? You know, if it works, don't fix it. People don't give a fuck. As long as people understand what you mean, people don't care. So, yeah, a lot of that. A lot of learning. Language can make things very easy. It can also make things very difficult in some ways. And you're just gonna have to learn stuff. Typology sucks. It's a pain in the butt. And especially if you just start out, it makes things really complicated and difficult. But over time, you'll get used to it. After a while, you'll learn everything and how everything looks and how to identify specific things, differentiate them from other things. and over time you'll just get better at it. So I went on a ramble there. I hope I answered your question. I can't remember. If you stuck around this long, you might as well subscribe, and then whilst you subscribe, you're aiding me in my road to 50k. Yes, I'm gonna continue saying that forever now, all the way until I meet 50k, and then I'm still gonna say that, because, or I'm gonna think of something else stupid, doesn't matter. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye guys.